Everyone in the coastal town of Cape Warren warned her not to go near the old lighthouse. Locals said the waves whispered her name, that the light in the tower flickered on during storms, even though the power had been cut for decades. But Sarah Donovan, 7 months pregnant and desperate for a new beginning, didn't believe in ghost stories. All she had left was her loyal German shepherd Atlas, and a letter claiming she'd inherited the abandoned lighthouse from a distant relative. When she arrived, the sea was wild and gray, and the tower stood alone against the cliffs like a broken tooth of stone. The front door creaked open by itself, and the air inside smelled of salt rust and memories. That night, Atlas began barking toward the spiral staircase leading to the lantern room, and beneath it, Sarah found something buried under the floorboards, a rusted metal hatch sealed with naval markings from World War II. What she uncovered next wasn't just a hidden chamber. It was a secret that had been sleeping beneath the lighthouse for nearly 80 years, a secret powerful enough to rewrite history to heal or destroy, depending on who found it first. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel and how many hearts still believe that sometimes the past calls us home. The wind off the Atlantic came sharp and heavy with salt, sweeping across the empty coastline like a warning that winter was near. Sarah Donovan tightened her grip on the steering wheel as her old Subaru climbed the narrow road that wound toward the cliffs. At 7 months pregnant, every movement was heavier, slower. Even breathing felt like lifting a weight she could no longer set down. Her long brown hair, once kept neat beneath hospital caps back when she worked double shifts as a nurse in Boston, was now tied carelessly behind her head. Strands escaped, catching the pale afternoon light, framing a face marked not by age, but exhaustion, thin, freckled skin, dark circles beneath eyes that had once held an easy kindness. She was 32, tall and slender, with the quiet poise of someone who had spent her life caring for others until there was nothing left to give. Now she carried a child in a silence that grew heavier with each mile north. Beside her, in the passenger seat, sat Atlas, a 6-year-old German shepherd with the kind of solemn intelligence that made people pause before reaching to pet him. His coat was sable and black, thick and slightly rough from months on the road. His amber eyes followed the horizon as though guarding something unseen. He had been her husband's dog once, Ethan's loyal shadow before Ethan traded his marriage for another woman and left Sarah to face the aftermath alone. Atlas, sensing the fracture before it happened, had chosen to stay with her. Sometimes when she couldn't sleep, she'd rest her hand on his chest and feel his steady breathing, proof that not everything she loved had abandoned her. The letter that brought her here lay on the dashboard, creased and yellowed from being unfolded too many times. To Miss Sarah Donovan, you have been named sole inheritor of the Cape Warren Lighthouse and adjoining property as recorded under the Donovan Family Trust, 1947. She'd laughed when she first read it, one of those dry, humorless laughs born more of disbelief than joy. She had no surviving relatives that she knew of. Her parents had died when she was in nursing school, and the only Donovans she remembered were ghosts in photographs her mother never talked about. But the letter was real, notarized, stamped by the county clerk's office in Portland. When she called to confirm, a tired-sounding clerk had simply said, "It's yours if you want it, ma'am." Hasn't had a keeper in decades. Now as she reached the crest of the cliff, the fog parted enough to reveal it the Cape Warren Lighthouse rising from the gray like the spine of some ancient creature half buried in stone. The tower's white paint had long since peeled away, revealing weathered brick streaked with rust and salt. The small keeper's cottage beside it slumped against the wind, its roof patched with corrugated metal and moss. Yet above it all, the glass lantern room still caught the last glimmer of dying light, and impossibly its bulb flickered once, twice, as though acknowledging her arrival. Sarah parked near the gate, the tires crunching over gravel slick with sea spray. The sky was the color of steel. Atlas jumped down first, his paws sinking into wet grass his nose twitching as he scanned the air. Sarah stood for a moment, steadying herself against the hood. Her belly pressed outward beneath her wool coat, and a faint ache traveled through her lower back. The baby shifted, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. She whispered half to herself, "Well, little one, this is it, our inheritance." The wind stole the words, carrying them toward the cliffs below. Inside the gate, the path wound through wild lupine and thorn bushes. The cottage door hung slightly open, and when she pushed it wider, the hinges groaned like something waking from a long sleep. The interior smelled of dust, salt, and something faintly metallic, old iron perhaps, or the ghost of seawater long dried. The furniture was sparse: a small table, a chair missing a leg, a rusted lantern resting beside a stack of faded nautical charts. She ran her hand along the wall, feeling damp plaster and the faint texture of old wallpaper beneath her fingertips. Atlas patted ahead, nails clicking softly against the warped wooden floor. He stopped at the foot of the spiral staircase that led up the tower, his ears pricking forward, tail low but alert. Sarah followed his gaze upward. "What do you think, boy?" she murmured. "Someone up there?" He gave a quiet, uncertain whine. For a brief moment she thought she heard it too, a creak, like footsteps circling above. But when she held her breath, the sound dissolved into the moan of the wind through broken windows. Her phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. This far out, even the gulls seemed to lose direction. She lit one of the old candles she'd found in a drawer and climbed halfway up the staircase, her hand brushing the cold metal rail. Halfway up, she stopped to catch her breath. The air heavier here, thick with dust and memory. A framed photograph hung crooked on the wall, a man in a naval uniform, early 1940s by the look of it, standing beside a woman whose hair was pinned in waves, her hand resting proudly on the same lighthouse that now stood behind Sarah. The name scrawled on the bottom corner read Margaret and Thomas, 1943. She didn't recognize them yet. Something in the woman's smile tugged at her memory. By the time she reached the lantern room, the last of the day's light was fading. The massive Fresnel lens, cracked in two places, but still intact, towered above her. She touched its cool surface and felt a pulse of warmth beneath her fingers, as though the glass itself remembered the hands that once kept it alive. The bulb inside impossibly glowed with a faint orange hue before dying again. Atlas barked suddenly from below, sharp and urgent, the kind of bark that sent a chill racing up her spine. She hurried down, candle trembling in her hand. He was standing near a trap door in the floorboards at the base of the tower, his body stiff, tail raised. The wood beneath him was damp and faintly discolored. When she knelt beside him, she saw that the trapdoor was sealed with an old iron ring fused with rust. She tugged once, but it wouldn't budge. Beneath it faintly she heard something, perhaps the rhythmic echo of water, or perhaps her imagination filling the silence. On the surface of the trapdoor, someone had carved a single phrase deep enough that her fingertips could trace it even in the dim candlelight. "The sea keeps what it must remember." Sarah sat back on her heels, her heartbeat matching the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. Atlas pressed against her side, warm and solid, grounding her in the present. She thought of Boston, the sterile hospital halls, the whispers after her, firing the empty apartment she'd left behind. She had lost her job, her husband, her home, and nearly her faith in everything good. Yet here in this place that smelled of rust and rain and salt, she felt something stir, a flicker, not of fear, but of belonging, as though some ancient thread had been waiting for her return. Outside, the fog thickened until the lighthouse seemed to float in a sea of cloud. Sarah extinguished the candle and sat by the window, watching as the faint orange light in the lantern room pulsed once more through the mist, steady and alive. Atlas rested his head on her lap, his breath slow, his loyalty wordless. She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe this is where we start again." The wind answered with a sigh that could have been the sea or could have been memory itself. The fog rolled in thick from the sea that night, swallowing the cliffs and pressing close against the windows until the glass trembled with every gust. Sarah Donovan lay awake on the narrow bed in the keeper's cottage, her body heavy with exhaustion, yet her mind alert, trapped between sleep and vigilance. Atlas slept near the door, his massive frame curled but tense ears twitching at each distant groan of the ocean. The lighthouse loomed outside its light dead once again since the final flicker she had seen at dusk. Yet Sarah could feel something alive in that tower, a presence subtle but constant, as if the walls remembered every life that had ever climbed those spiral steps. She tried to tell herself it was only nerves, only the isolation of the coast. But when she finally closed her eyes, the sound came slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Footsteps. They circled the spiral staircase above her one at a time, as though someone barefoot was pacing up there, pausing, then turning. Atlas rose before she did, his ears pricked and his low growl rippling through the silence. The hair along his spine lifted. Sarah held her breath, listening. The steps stopped. For a moment, there was only the wind, and then a faint tapping like something metal brushing stone. She lit the candle beside her bed, her hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "Stay close." Atlas moved beside her as she opened the cottage door and stepped into the night. The air was damp and metallic, the fog dense enough to taste. The tower's silhouette rose in front of her, its outline blurred and ghostly. She pushed the heavy door open, the hinges shrieking against the stillness, and stepped inside. Her candlelight barely pierced the darkness. Dust hung in the air like mist, and from somewhere deep within the tower a drip of water echoed rhythmic, endless. She called out softly, "Hello? Is someone here?" Her voice died, immediately absorbed by stone. Atlas sniffed the floor, growled once, then moved toward the base of the staircase. Sarah followed his gaze upward, half expecting to see a figure staring down at her from the landing. But there was nothing. Still, she could feel the faint vibration of movement, a tremor that wasn't wind. The spiral steps creaked again, higher up, slow, patient. She climbed 3 steps before stopping. A coldness moved down her spine, not the chill of air, but something older, heavier. Atlas barked sharply, one deep sound that reverberated up the stairwell, and the noise above ceased completely. Silence fell so thick it felt alive. Sarah waited, heart pounding. Then, faintly beneath the boards near her feet, she heard something else, a hollow echo, the suggestion of space beneath. Kneeling, she set down the candle and pressed her hand against the floor. The same iron ring she had found earlier that evening glinted faintly. She tried again to lift it, but it didn't move. The wood felt warmer than before, almost pulsing, and she withdrew her hand quickly. "Not tonight," she whispered, backing away. "Not alone." Atlas whined softly, glancing toward the door as though urging her to leave. She didn't argue. By morning, the fog still clung stubbornly to the cliffs, but sunlight bled through in pale ribbons. The world seemed washed clean, though the tower still cast its long silent shadow over the rocks below. Sarah brewed weak coffee on the old gas stove, the bitter scent filling the cottage. Her back ached. The baby shifted restlessly beneath her ribs. She had barely slept 2 hours. When Atlas began barking outside, she almost spilled her mug. At first she thought it was another echo, until she saw a shape emerging through the mist. An old man walked the path toward the cottage, tall but slightly stooped, with a fisherman's gait, wide stance, slow, deliberate. He wore a wool coat that had seen better decades, its buttons dulled with salt. His beard was silver gray, untrimmed but clean, and his eyes, sharp sea blue, carried the calm of someone who had watched too many storms to fear another. When he spoke, his voice was low, gravelly, with that lilting Maine accent that stretched vowels like the tide. "You must be the new keeper." Sarah hesitated, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding Atlas back by his collar. "I'm not sure that's what I am," she said. "I didn't even know this place still needed one." The old man's lips curved into something between a smile and a frown. "Everything out here needs watching, miss. The sea doesn't forgive neglect." He looked up at the tower, his gaze softening for a moment. I'm Elias Whitmore. Used to tend that light before the Coast Guard shut it down. Been keeping an eye on it since." He moved closer, and Sarah noticed the deep lines around his eyes, carved by years of squinting into sunlight and spray. His hands were large, rough scarred from rope and work, but when he extended one toward her, his grip was steady and gentle. There was kindness in his posture, but also the quiet heaviness of a man who carried loss like a weight that never quite leaves the shoulders. Over black coffee that steamed in the chilly air, Elias told her fragments of the lighthouse's story. It was built in 1897, he said, his gaze drifting toward the sea. Keeper named Nathaniel Warren wanted to honor his wife after she drowned in a storm. Said the light would guide her soul home. Folks said it burned brighter than any other beacon on this coast. Then the war came, and the Navy started using it for signaling Morse radio relays codes. That's when things turned strange. He paused, his weathered face shadowed by memory. The last full-time keeper was a woman, Margaret Donovan. I reckon that name means something to you. Sarah froze her fingers, tightening around her mug. Margaret Donovan. She might have been a relative. I found an old photo upstairs. Elias nodded slowly as if he'd expected that answer. A good woman. Brave, too. Stayed on after her husband was lost at sea. Folks said she kept the light running through the worst storm of '43, said it glowed even when the power failed. But then she vanished. No body, no farewell, just gone. The Coast Guard closed it soon after. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper, "And you think there's a reason?" He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "I think that place holds its own memory. Some things built from grief don't rest easy. You'd do well not to stay too long, miss. When that light burns on its own, something's waking beneath it." The words lingered long after Elias left, walking slowly down the foggy road until he was nothing more than a moving blur swallowed by mist. Sarah stood on the porch watching him go, her thoughts tangled between skepticism and unease. She wanted to believe it was all superstition, the mutterings of an old man clinging to stories. But as the day dimmed again and the fog returned like breath upon the sea, she found herself drawn back to the tower. Inside, the air was cooler, thicker. Atlas followed reluctantly, tail low, his claws clicking softly. Sarah brought a lantern this time, its yellow light spilling across the spiral steps. She stopped before the iron door she hadn't noticed the night before, half buried in shadow behind the staircase. Its surface was carved with an emblem, a wave curling around an open eye. Salt and rust had fused the edges, sealing it shut. She brushed her fingers across the carving. The metal was cold enough to sting. Above the door, barely visible under the soot and age, were words etched into the wall. "The sea keeps what it must remember." Sarah's pulse quickened. She stepped back, the beam of her lantern trembling slightly. The wind outside rose, moaning through the cracks, and for a heartbeat she thought she heard it again, footsteps circling the stairs above. Not hurried, not threatening. Just patient, watching. Atlas growled low, positioning himself between her and the door. She exhaled slowly, the baby stirring as if sensing her fear. "Not tonight," she whispered again, backing away. "Not yet." She turned off the lantern before leaving, casting one last look toward the carved eye, gleaming faintly in the darkness. As she closed the tower door behind her, the faint hum of the wind seemed to shift, almost like the sound of breathing beneath the stone. The storm came early that morning, rolling over the Atlantic like an ancient beast stretching after a long sleep. The air smelled of salt and iron. Rain lashed the windows of the cottage in furious bursts. Sarah Donovan stood at the sink, watching through the fogged glass as the sea churned below the cliffs. Her face, pale from the restless night before, caught the gray light of dawn. Her dark brown hair was damp from a leak above the window that she had failed to fix, sticking to her temples in loose strands. She looked weary, but beneath that exhaustion was a quiet defiance, the same steady resolve that had kept her on her feet through years of hospital shifts and heartbreak. Atlas paced behind her, his nails clicking on the wooden floor tail, low but restless. The dog had been uneasy all morning, growling at the sea as though sensing something she couldn't see. When the thunder rolled closer, Sarah decided to take him out before the storm worsened. She pulled on her raincoat, oversized, faded yellow, the same one she'd worn during her long drives north, and stepped into the screaming wind. The rain came sideways, needles against her skin. Atlas pulled forward, muscles tense beneath his wet fur, his powerful body straining toward the cliff's edge. "Easy, boy," Sarah called out, her voice nearly swallowed by the storm. The sky was a flat wall of gray, and the sea below boiled against the rocks, sending up white plumes of spray. Then Atlas barked sharply, a deep, urgent sound that cut through the noise, and darted down the narrow path toward the shore. She followed, slipping on wet stones, her boots sinking into seaweed and grit. When she reached him, Atlas stood at the edge of a tide pool, nose pressed to a tangled clump of kelp and driftwood. Something glassy caught the light, a bottle, its surface clouded with age, half buried in sand and tangled vines of green. Sarah crouched down, breathing heavily, and pried it loose. Inside was a piece of paper curled tight, the ink faint, but still visible. The cork had been sealed with wax, brittle and cracked. She carried it back to the cottage, Atlas trotting behind, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to follow. Inside, Sarah laid the bottle on the table beside the flickering lantern. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked the cork loose with a knife. The paper slid out, fragile as a breath. She unfolded it carefully, the scent of sea salt rising from the yellowed pages. The handwriting was elegant, looping the kind taught in another era. "To whoever finds this. My name is Margaret Donovan, Naval Communications Division, 1943. If this reaches you, then the sea has kept its word." Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Margaret Donovan, the same name she had seen on the photograph in the tower, the same woman Elias had spoken of. The letter continued in delicate ink. "Cape Warren Light is not merely a beacon. It was repurposed by the Navy to send coded transmissions to vessels along the Atlantic line. They said it was for defense, but I have seen what lies beneath the foundation, what they brought here to hide. It was not meant to be disturbed. The sea keeps what it must remember. Tell them never to open the chamber beneath the stone floor. It belongs to the deep." Sarah set the letter down, her pulse quickening. She read it again, tracing the name at the bottom, Margaret Donovan. June 12, 1943. She looked toward the lighthouse through the window, its silhouette veiled in rain. A tremor passed through her chest. "It can't be coincidence," she whispered. "It can't." Atlas whined softly, head resting on her knee. Her thoughts spiraled. Was Margaret, her great-grandmother? The family name, the letter, the inheritance, everything pointed to a connection that time had buried. That evening, after the storm quieted, she walked to the lighthouse again. The path was slick and shining under the moonlight, the sea now calm but murmuring, as if whispering secrets to the shore. She carried the lantern from the cottage, its light trembling against the mist. Atlas walked close, his fur still damp, ears alert. When they reached the door, Sarah hesitated. The faint smell of rust and brine drifted from inside. She unlocked the latch, and the door opened with its usual long sigh. The air within the tower was colder than outside, dense and unmoving. Sarah climbed the spiral steps, her lantern casting warped shadows along the walls. The baby inside her kicked once sharply, making her pause and steady herself against the railing. "You feel it too, don't you?" she murmured, touching her belly. The child's heartbeat fluttered faintly against her palm as if answering. When she reached the lantern room, she saw it, the impossible glow. The massive Fresnel lens, which had been dead for decades now, shimmered with pale blue light. It wasn't electric. It pulsed softly like breathing. Sarah's throat tightened. She checked the fuse box at the base of the wall, wires torn rusted, no power. The light flickered once, then steadied, bathing the room in a cold luminescence. Atlas whimpered and backed toward the stairs, his tail tucked low. And then, faint but clear, came the sound of a woman's voice. Not words humming a tune that rose and fell with the waves outside. The melody was sorrowful, yet beautiful, echoing through the iron and glass. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes without knowing why. She whispered, "Margaret." The humming ceased, instantly replaced by silence so profound she could hear her own pulse. Then, from somewhere below, the faint echo of chains rattling slow and deliberate, followed by the whisper of waves beneath stone. She fled down the stairs, Atlas beside her, his nails scraping metal. When they reached the ground floor, she stopped before the sealed iron door with the carved wave and eye. The air was vibrating faintly. She held the lantern close and saw new condensation on the door's surface like breath. A drop of water slid down the metal and landed on the floor, darkening the dust. Sarah backed away. The child inside her kicked again, harder this time, and she gasped. By the time she returned to the cottage, her hair was plastered to her face and her hands shook uncontrollably. She sank onto the chair, staring at the letter on the table. The edges fluttered gently, though no wind stirred. She picked it up and read the last line once more. "Tell them never to open the chamber beneath the stone floor." Later, unable to sleep, Sarah sat by the window watching the waves shimmer under the moon. The fog had returned, wrapping the cliffs in silver. Atlas lay at her feet, twitching in uneasy dreams. Every few minutes he would growl softly, the sound rumbling deep in his throat. Sarah's eyes drifted to the horizon where the faint light of the lighthouse pulsed again, steady, unbroken, defying logic. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering, "I don't know what you're hearing, little one, but I promise I'll keep us safe." Yet even as she said it, she knew safety was a word that no longer belonged to this place. Cape Warren had awoken something. Something that remembered her blood, her name, and perhaps even the life she carried within her. And in the distance, carried by the night wind, came the faintest echo of that same melody, the woman's song rising and falling with the tide as if welcoming her home. The wind had begun to howl again by dusk, the kind that seemed to carry voices from the sea. The sky was the color of bruised metal, thick clouds dragging their weight toward the cliffs. Sarah Donovan stood at the base of the lighthouse, her lantern trembling in her grip, watching Atlas sniff restlessly around the cracked stone floor. Ever since the letter had surfaced, the dog had grown uneasy whenever they entered the tower, pacing, whining, and refusing to settle. That evening, his unease sharpened into urgency. He stopped suddenly near the iron door that led to the lower chamber, ears pricked forward, tail rigid. Then he pawed at a section of the floor where one stone had shifted slightly out of alignment. Sarah frowned. "What is it, boy?" The stone looked different from the others, newer, perhaps replaced at some point. When she knelt beside it, the air above it felt colder. Atlas began to bark low and rhythmic, a sound that echoed strangely in the hollow chamber. Sarah set down her lantern, its light casting long shadows against the wall, and pressed her palms against the stone. It gave a little under pressure, as though something beneath had weakened. She hesitated, heart thudding. The baby stirred in her belly, a faint kick beneath her ribs as if answering. With effort, she pried the loose slab aside, revealing a dark space below. The smell that rose from it was sharp and damp, old seawater mixed with rust. She lowered the lantern, and its light fell into a cavity barely large enough to crawl through. Water shimmered below, reflecting fragments of the stone ceiling like glass. There was something there, half submerged, a metal chest, large square, its surface mottled with corrosion. On its lid, faint but unmistakable, was the insignia of the United States Navy, an anchor intertwined with a serpent. Her breath caught. "Margaret," she whispered. The storm outside cracked open the sky, lightning flooding the tower with ghostly blue. She pulled back quickly, startled by the thunder's boom that followed. But Atlas barked again, insistent. Whatever lay down there wanted to be found. Sarah fetched a rope from the storage closet and looped it around the nearest beam. Her body ached from the strain. The child within her, heavy and restless, but determination outweighed fear. She tied the rope around her waist, wedged her lantern onto a hook, and slowly descended into the narrow opening. The chill was immediate, biting through her coat. The water reached her knees, freezing, alive with movement. She waded forward, feeling the slick stone beneath her boots until her fingers met the rough edge of the chest. It was heavier than she expected. She struggled to lift it, her breath clouding the air. "Come on," she hissed, every muscle trembling. When it finally broke free of the mud, it released a sound, a long sigh, like something exhaling after years of silence. She dragged it toward the rope, and with Atlas pulling from above, managed to hoist it onto the main floor. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely work the latch. When she pried it open, the smell of salt and iron filled the room. Inside lay not gold nor jewels, but fragments of a life, a small leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth, a handful of black and white photographs, and 2 urns made of brass, their surfaces engraved with names. One read Margaret Donovan, the other Lieutenant Thomas Hale. For a moment, Sarah forgot to breathe. She touched the urns, gently tracing the worn lettering with her fingertips. The photos beneath showed a young woman in uniform, Margaret unmistakably standing beside a man in naval whites. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair combed neatly back, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to look right through the lens. There was a gentleness in his expression, the kind of quiet strength born of discipline. Sarah imagined him as a man who spoke little but felt deeply, someone who carried duty as a second skin. In one photograph, Margaret and Thomas stood together on the lighthouse balcony, arms around each other, the sea sprawling endlessly behind them. She opened the journal next. The ink had bled in places, but much of it was still legible. The entries began in late 1942. They brought the serum to night. One page read, "A military experiment. They call it Project Lazarus, a solution designed to heal tissue instantly to keep soldiers alive on the field. Thomas says it's dangerous, but orders are orders." Another entry, months later, trembled with urgency. "The serum reacts to salt water. It breathes somehow. It shouldn't exist, but it does. Thomas and I have decided to seal it below the lighthouse. The Admiral can't know. The sea will keep what it must remember." Sarah turned page after page, reading about their desperate attempt to hide the experiment as the war closed in. The final entry stopped her cold. "They found us. The storm is coming faster than we expected. If the sea wants us, let it take us together." Lightning tore through the sky, blinding white. The wind outside screamed against the walls. The baby kicked sharply, and Sarah gasped, gripping her belly. Atlas whined, pacing. The lighthouse groaned under the force of the storm. Then, without warning, the light in the lantern room above blazed to life. It wasn't the soft glow she'd seen before. This was blinding radiance spilling down the stairs like liquid fire. The entire tower shuddered as though the earth beneath it were breathing. Sarah shielded her eyes, backing toward the wall. Atlas barked furiously, the sound swallowed by thunder. Rain lashed the windows, and through the flashing light she saw movement on the staircase, faint at first, then unmistakable. 2 figures. They ascended together, hand in hand, a man in a tattered naval coat and a woman in a long dress that fluttered like seaweed underwater. Their faces were pale, but luminous eyes, gentle, almost sorrowful. The man looked exactly like the photograph. The woman's hair, dark and curled, framed a face both young and timeless. Sarah's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. The figures reached the midpoint of the stairs, turned toward her, and for one heartbeat the woman smiled. Then the next flash of lightning came, and they were gone. Silence followed, broken only by the steady hum of the reawakened beacon above. Sarah stood, trembling, tears streaking her face, unsure if what she had seen was spirit or memory. The urns on the floor glimmered faintly in the light, and she whispered, "You kept your promise, didn't you? You let the sea keep its secret." The storm raged on through the night, but inside the tower, warmth flickered again, not just from the lantern, but from something unseen. As the waves battered the cliffs below, the light of Cape Warren cut through the darkness once more, as it had 80 years ago, defying the storm, the sea, and time itself. When morning came, the air was still heavy with the smell of rain. Sarah stood by the open window, holding the journal against her chest. Atlas lay beside her head on his paws, exhausted. She looked toward the ocean, its surface calm again, silver under the dawn. "Maybe you were right, Margaret," she whispered softly. "The sea remembers what we forget." The morning after the storm, the air was eerily calm. The sea that had roared like a living creature the night before now lay smooth and silver, breathing mist into the rising sun. The cliffs still dripped with rain, and the lighthouse stood battered but unbroken, its white paint streaked with salt and age. Sarah Donovan stepped outside the cottage with Atlas close behind her, the cold wind carrying the scent of kelp and iron. Her long brown hair, unbrushed and tangled from the sleepless night, fluttered against her face. The storm had left its mark on her two dark circles under her eyes, skin pale as parchment. But there was a quiet radiance about her, now something unspoken in her expression, a mixture of exhaustion and reverence. Atlas moved ahead, his paws crunching through the wet gravel, nose twitching as he sniffed the ground near the tower's base. The dog's coat was damp and dull, but his eyes gleamed sharp amber, alert for any sign of danger. Sarah followed him to the entrance where the stone floor had partially collapsed during the storm. The air smelled of wet earth and salt water. She crouched careful with her swollen belly and shone her flashlight into the gaping hole. The water below had receded, revealing the glint of something metallic. With cautious steps, she climbed down using the same rope she had left tied from the night before. The underground air was damp and heavy, echoing with the faint sound of dripping water. Atlas remained above, whining softly, his paws scratching the floor. The space below was narrower than she remembered, part tunnel, part cave, carved by the sea itself. The flashlight beam swept over the rough stone walls, and there, half buried in sand, was a glass bottle sealed with wax. Its surface shimmered faintly in the dim light as though reflecting a light from within. She picked it up. Inside, a liquid of pale blue glowed softly, swirling as she moved it. Around its neck was a small tag, the handwriting faint but legible. For healing, not for war. Sarah's throat tightened. She thought of Margaret and Thomas, the lives lost to protect this secret, and how the ocean had chosen this moment, this calm after devastation, to reveal what remained. "You wanted this to be found," she whispered. "But not by them, by me." Back in the cottage, she placed the bottle on the table and sat before it, watching the liquid move as if alive. Atlas lay at her feet, his head resting on her boot, eyes half closed, but alert to every sound. For a long time, Sarah didn't move. She was thinking of all that had happened, the lights, the song, the ghosts, and the strange sense of destiny that seemed to bind her to this place. Then, slowly, she reached for her phone. 2 days later, she drove to Portland General Hospital, where she once worked years ago, before her life unraveled. The hospital was just as she remembered: cold white walls, the scent of antiseptic, the soft hum of machines that measured life in beeps. She felt out of place now, her long coat soaked from the rain hair pulled back loosely, one hand resting protectively on her belly. When she reached the reception, a nurse recognized her. "Sarah Donovan." "I thought you left Maine." Sarah managed a tired smile. "I did, but something brought me back." She asked to see Dr. Emily Harper, a friend from her nursing days. Emily was in her late 30s, short and sharp-featured, with sandy hair tied in a neat bun and bright gray eyes that missed nothing. She had the air of someone who had learned to balance compassion with pragmatism, the kind of woman who had seen enough loss to stop making promises but never stopped trying. When Sarah showed her the bottle, Emily frowned. "What is this?" "I found it under the Cape Warren Lighthouse," Sarah said softly. "There's something in it, I don't know what exactly. But I think I think it's connected to a World War II experiment. It might have healing properties. Emily raised an eyebrow, half amused, half skeptical. Sarah, this looks like seawater. I thought so too, Sarah replied, until I saw it glow. She unscrewed the cap just enough to let the faintest whiff escape. A cool scent filled the room. Not salt, but something metallic and alive. Emily blinked. That's strange. She took a small, sterile dropper and collected a sample, her scientific curiosity overriding caution. Let's run a quick test. They spent the next hour in the lab watching the sample react under microscopes and chemical tests. What they found silenced even Emily's doubt. The liquid showed a unique cellular pattern capable of accelerating regeneration in tissue samples. Not magic science, but something beyond known boundaries. Emily exhaled slowly, her professional calm faltering. Sarah, this isn't just healing fluid, it's biological living in some way. Whatever this is, it could change medicine. Where did you say you found it? Sarah met her gaze, buried beneath a lighthouse that never stopped shining. The discovery spread quietly at first, a whisper among researchers, a curiosity noted in local papers. But within weeks, reporters began arriving at Cape Warren. The town that had once been forgotten now found itself on the map again. The state government declared the lighthouse a protected historical site, recognizing its ties to wartime history and the Donovan family's legacy. The Navy sent representatives to investigate, though they found nothing more in the tunnels the sea had claimed, whatever secrets were left. Sarah remained. The cottage was repaired, the tower restored its light functioning once more under her care. She renamed the place Margaret's Light, a small coastal rescue and recovery station that provided aid to fishermen and sailors caught in the brutal Maine waters. She worked with quiet purpose, her belly growing heavier with each passing week. Atlas, older now, spent his days lying on the porch watching the waves with patient vigilance. As months passed, tourists came to see the place drawn by curiosity or reverence, perhaps both. Some said the lighthouse still glowed brighter during storms. Others swore they heard a woman's song on windy nights. Sarah never confirmed nor denied any of it. She simply smiled, her eyes distant, and kept the lanterns burning. A year after the storm, on a calm spring morning, Sarah went into labor. The sea was peaceful that day, the horizon washed in gold. Emily drove from Portland to be with her, her steady hands guiding the delivery. Atlas lay near the door, his muzzle-graying eyes half closed but listening. The birth was long but steady, and when the baby's first cry echoed through the room, the sound mingled with a distant hum, low, resonant, almost like the ocean itself answering. Sarah held her daughter against her chest, tears glistening on her cheeks. The child's tiny fingers curled around her own, and in that moment the old light at the top of Cape Warren flickered, once, then burned bright, steady, unwavering. Emily, breathless and wide-eyed, whispered, "Is that?" Sarah smiled faintly. "It's just Margaret saying hello." Outside, the waves shimmered under the first light of dawn. The sea, for once, was silent. And high above them, the lighthouse stood proud again, its beam stretching across the water like a promise kept. In the end, the story of Cape Warren is not just about a forgotten lighthouse or a secret buried beneath the sea. It's about faith, redemption, and the quiet miracles that still exist in this world. Sarah's journey reminds us that even in our darkest storms, God's light never truly fades. It might flicker, it might waver, but it never disappears. The same hand that guided her through fear, loss, and uncertainty is the same hand that reaches for each of us every day through love, through courage, through the simple act of holding on when everything feels lost. Perhaps the healing water Sarah found was more than science. Perhaps it was a symbol of divine mercy, proof that even what humanity once used for destruction can be redeemed for good. In our daily lives, miracles don't always come as glowing light or ghostly songs. Sometimes they arrive as a kind word, a second chance, or the strength to forgive ourselves. If you believe in second chances, If you've ever felt lost but somehow found your way back to the light, share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. Tell us what miracle you've witnessed in your own life, no matter how small, in the comments below. And before you leave, take a moment to pray with us. Lord, bless every heart watching this. Let your light guide them through every storm, and may your grace be the calm after their chaos. Protect their homes, their dreams, and their faith. Amen. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of faith, miracles, and redemption. May God bless you, and keep your light shining always.